And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a nice simple basic recipe for you. This is our method for homemade ketchup. And at the end of this one we're also going to be using the safe home canning method to make sure that it's shelf stable. But if you're tired of buying Heinz or anything like that, here is your homemade alternative. And we're going to start off with some ingredients. So we have some amazing fresh tomatoes right now. We're also going to be using a shallot, one dried chili pepper, a little bit of sugar, some cinnamon, some whole cloves and allspice, and some celery salt and some apple cider vinegar. Now, there are a couple of different methods that are typically used, and we're going to be actually adding the spice directly into the stewed tomatoes, so we'll show you that in a moment. We're going to start by getting our veggies ready. So we're going to start with the shallot and the tomatoes. So we're just going to cut the shallot pretty small here. We do want pretty small pieces of this. We want everything to kind of melt together. Now, it doesn't have to be pretty or anything. We're not going to be keeping any of the texture in the final dish, and we are going to be straining this through a tammy at the end as well. So we're going to be getting rid of anything like the skins or any lumps of anything at the end, as well as the whole spices. So we're just going to give that a nice chop. We're going to make it into pretty small pieces. They don't need to be particularly even because they are going to cook for a long time. For our tomatoes, we're just going to take the center out. We're going to take the stem part out. And then we're just going to cut these into 8. So cut them into 4 and then in half again. And again, these are going to cook for a long, long time. So we just want to make sure that they're roughly the same size so they'll cook at the same speed, but they don't need to look pretty. They are going to be ketchup by the end. So we're going to start with just a couple of tomatoes and our shallots. And we're just going to put that on the heat. We don't need to put anything else in the pot. We don't need any oil or anything. These are going to release a lot of liquid as they start to cook. So we're just going to let them go and give those shallots a little bit of a head start and make sure that things are started before we add the rest of our tomatoes. So meanwhile, we're going to go back and cut up the rest of our tomatoes. While those have started cooking, we're also going to add our celery salt and sugar. Now this actually calls for celery seed. We didn't have that. We do have some homemade celery salt, and we're going to use that as both the salt and the celery component. All of our whole spices are going to go in, as well as our apple cider vinegar. So this is already pretty much the flavor profile of ketchup. And the other way to do this is to make a tea with the vinegar and the spices so that the spices infuse into the vinegar, and then you add that in the end, which also works. This makes for a little bit brighter flavor and a little more intense flavor as well. So once that's all been added and you've finished cutting up your tomatoes, we're going to add the rest of those tomatoes. We do want this all to cook. You don't need to be gentle. Again, we're hoping these are all going to squish down to nothing by the end of all of this. So we're going to pop the cover on that and let everything get hot and cook for a little while. You can leave a little gap open because there's going to be a lot of liquid, and we do want this to reduce as it goes forward. As you can see, a lot of that liquid has already come up, and what we're going to do is just very gently, because it's extremely full, very gently stir up so that the cooked bits at the bottom start to come up to the top, and those less cooked parts up at the top just get down closer to the heat so that they are a little more, they can get a little more cooked. Now, if you don't want to deal with the skins, you can concasse your tomatoes quickly before you add them in here, but it's not really necessary. As I said, we're going to be putting all of this through a strainer later, so we're going to run it all through a tammy, and all of those skins, the whole spices, they're all going to get caught in that before we move on to the next thing. Alright, so now that we've given a little stir, we're going to cover that again, let it cook for a while, and here you can see everything's pretty well cooked, and it's starting to reduce. It's come down a little bit from its highest level on the pot there. And you do, because this does have sugar in it, you do want to keep an eye on it and give it a stir once in a while. You want to make sure that nothing's sticking to the bottom of your pot, and you do want to make sure that you're using a non-reactive pot as well. So we're using this cast iron that's porcelain lined, because you want to make sure you're not having that acidic tomato mixture touching your steel or anything like that. Pots, you will get a kind of a metallic flavor if you do. Now it is starting to darken a little bit as well, which is fine. Again, that might be an indication that things are sticking or scorching a little on the bottom, so you do want to make sure you're keeping an eye on that. It has now reduced a lot. You can see it has gone down quite a bit. We haven't removed anything. It is just cooking away. At this point, the tomatoes are pretty much all cooked, so we're just testing against the side of the pot. If they're all really, really soft and you can smush them easily against the side of the pot, then we're pretty much ready to move on to the next stage of this. We're just going to give them a little squish there while it continues cooking. And we're going to set that aside until it's about room temperature. We don't want to have to run it through the tammy when it's extremely hot, because that makes it a little trickier. So we're going to let this cool down just a little bit in a bowl. So we're going to add our finally cooked mixture into the tammy. And you do want to make sure you're getting all of that in there. It's about room temperature now. It's still pretty warm, but it's not hot anymore, so it's easy to handle. If you have any little dry bits on the side of the bowl, you can sort of squeegee them off with the wetter stuff. That's what Chef Caleb is doing here. So there we go, and then you're just going to push that all through that really fine screen of the tammy. As you're going, you're going to notice that it collects the skins. You may want to periodically remove a few of them. You're also going to want to pull out all of those whole spices, because those are not going to go through the tammy as well. Anything that's cooked and soft and ready to go through is fine for our final product. So don't forget, when you're doing this, that you do want to scrape everything off the bottom of the tammy, not the top, but the bottom, because there's going to be a lot that sticks there, and you want to make sure you get all that. That's a lot of flavor. It's a lot of that tomato mixture. So just make sure you're scraping the bottom of the tammy, not just collecting what comes through. And you can see all we have left in there. We have a couple of whole spices and a bunch of tomato skins and seeds, which we don't want in our final product, so that's perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. So there's our final product. Well, not quite yet. You can see it's still a little bit soft, or not soft, but loose for ketchup. It's not quite as thick as we were hoping. Now we let that sit overnight. We put it in just some canning jars. We didn't can it yet. We just put it in some canning jars overnight and put it in the fridge. And this is the next day. We are now going to reboil this at a pretty medium temperature. We don't want to do it really super slowly. And we just want to reduce this again until it has become the consistency that we want. And this is going to differ from person to person. Really, you can stop whenever you're happy with the consistency of the ketchup. So we're trying to get it to a pretty thick state. So we're going to cook this down probably by about half. And you can see here it is really cooking down quite nicely. Again, you do want to keep an eye on it at this point, because there is sugar in there. There's all the natural sugars in the tomato as well, and it will stick to the bottom and scorch, so you want to give it a good stir pretty frequently. So this looks just about right. That's about the consistency we want. We have our canning jars ready to go. And this is just the same as the USDA safe home canning method that we used in a previous video, and I will link to that in the description below as well. So get out a canning funnel. Again, make sure that you don't overfill your jars. And we're just going to pop that ketchup into some jars ready for canning. And And if you have a little left over, that's fine. Just put that in a smaller container, and we just ate it the next day on some fries. So that works out really, really well. And the rest of this will be shelf stable because we are using the home canning method. So we're going to get that into our boiling water. And once again, you want to make sure that those lids, the round lids, are on firmly, but the rings aren't all the way on yet. You want to give it a little bit of space, and then we're going to pull those out after they have boiled. Now be careful, don't touch these. Of course, they are extremely hot. And you can see one of them has already popped down. The lid has already popped all the way down onto that jar, and it's ready to go. So this is the little bit left over we had that we didn't put into the jars, and it's absolutely delicious. It's very much ketchup turned up to 11. A little bit spicy from that hot pepper pod, which is entirely optional. All those spices come out really clearly, absolutely delicious, really, really simple. It does take a little bit of time, but will stay shelf stable for a long, long time because you've done the home canning method. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.